Hi, welcome back to educator.com. This lesson covers Office Open XML, which is the file format used by more recent versions of Microsoft Office. If you've upgraded to Office 2007 or Office 2010 in the last few years, you may have noticed some compatibility issues arise. For instance, let's say you upgraded at home, but your work hasn't upgraded yet, and you create a file at home and try to bring it in and open it up at work on an older version of Word or Excel or whatever it is you've created. You may find that the document won't open properly, or you might need to download a plugin, and even then maybe it doesn't work all that well. So in this lesson, we're going to take a look at why that is. We'll be taking a look at the fact that newer docx files and other Office files are actually zip files. We're going to be actually unzipping a Word 2007 document, or even later, Word 2010, this works as well. And we'll take a look at the XML files that actually make up the current Microsoft Office file formats. To get started, let's take a look at the technologies behind the newer formats. As I mentioned before, newer Office files are zip files. Now, zip, in case you weren't always quite sure about that, is what's known as a lossless compression algorithm. This means that it creates a smaller version of a file or a collection of files without losing any data. And it's meant to make things easier to store in smaller spaces. It also eases in transport of files over a network, that sort of thing. However, if you've used zip, you may have noticed that if you try to zip a zip file, it doesn't get any smaller. In fact, if you try to zip two zip files together, they don't get any smaller. The nature of the algorithm is such as that once it's been zipped, it can't be zipped again. If you've tried to email someone a rather large, newer Office file, such as a large Excel spreadsheet created in Office 2010, you may notice that if you try to zip those, they don't get any smaller either. And again, to reiterate, this is because newer Office files are in fact zip files. So let's take a look at the ramifications of this. What we're going to do is we are going to create a Word document. And we're going to see what happens if we change it into a zip file and unzip it. Now, if you try this with an older Word format, you'll find that older Word files are not zip files. If you change it into a zip file and unzip it, it's just going to give you an error, or at worst, create a big mess for you. You can only do this with newer Word format documents, such as Office 2007 or Office 2010. So let's start with a blank Word document and put some content in it. All right, just to make things fancy, we'll put a little italicization in there. Okay, so here's a real basic Word document. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and save it. And then what I'm going to do is close it. Now I'm going to do something very dangerous that everyone who uses a computer tells you not to do. I'm going to go locate my actual file now that it's closed. And I see that it's got a docx file extension. This is in contrast to the doc file extension from older Word formats. And it was done this way by Microsoft in order to emphasize the fact that these are two different underlying formats. They're not really compatible. Newer versions of Office will open older versions because they've created a separate section of the software that does that. But older versions of Office cannot open the newer versions without downloading some kind of plugin or other. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the extension from docx to zip. And I'll get a warning. And I'll just breeze on past the warning and say, yes, this is how I want to do it. Now, if you're using a Mac, you may need to jump through some more hoops as far as what program you need to open it up with, or be careful not to open it, because it still will open up in Word and do it correctly. If we're in Windows, we'll have an easier time of it. What I have, if I unzip this file and extract it, it turns out it's a folder. All right, and let's take a look at this folder. It's got a bunch of XML files in it. Here's an XML file called content types. Here's a folder called rels. Folder called doc props. If I have anything important in there, here I've got some XML files and even a JPEG for the thumbnail. It's all included in the Word file format. And then I've got a folder called Word. And this contains a whole bunch of different XML files. So what we've got is not just one file. When we create a Word document, we think, oh, I'm creating just one file here. In Word 2007 and Word 2010, you are creating a whole bunch of different files. It all gets created automatically and then zipped together to try to make sure that it seems like a smaller file format. For instance, this entire folder structure has a larger file size than if I zip it together. Now, where is my actual content, the actual text that I wrote in a document? Well, it's in something called document.xml. Now, if you open this up by yourself, it's going to open up in a text editor. It's probably going to be all basically one long row. It might break across a bunch of lines and be a little bit hard to read. So let's take a look at a version that I have here where I've kind of broken things and indented them. And we can take a look at what we've got. All right, here is, out of the many XML files that are created when you create a newer Word file, this is the one that actually contains the text that you wrote. And even then, that only makes up a small part of the overall file. You can see it's quite big. Start off with our XML declaration. Again, the file type that Microsoft uses is called Office Open XML. The reason that Microsoft uses this is because they wanted to create something interoperable. They created a technology called OLE, Object Link Embedding, so that you could, for example, include part of a Word document in a PowerPoint presentation or Excel table in a Word document, that sort of thing. And it turns out that since XML can combine file formats, it's a lot easier to do it in XML. It also means that Microsoft can incorporate a lot of other file formats that are XML-based and thus make Office more flexible. So we see that our main element here is called document. Its namespace prefix is W for, down here, it's word processing. You see that we have a whole bunch of other namespaces declared, although for a very simple document like this, we're really not using any of them. And down here is our actual text. We have a body element. We have a P element, probably stands for paragraph. We have an R element, probably stands for row. All right. And then I've got a T element, which probably stands for text. Here's my first line, A. Okay, then I close out my paragraph here. My next paragraph contains hi. And then I got my next paragraph here. Kind of a long one here. And here's where I wrote, how you doing? And the U has an empty element called I, which was for italics. It's separated out into its own row. But then they use this XML space attribute called preserve, which means that if the text was typed in all as one line, even though they're using another row element for the italicized text, it's all going to be kept on one line because that's how I typed it in. It preserves however I typed it. If I didn't put it on a separate line, then it's not going to put it on a separate line. So we've got this incredibly complex XML structure for a very simple Word document. And then I've got all this extra kind of meta information about the document before it's all over. Page size, page margin. All of this is stored with the document so that all of this is available to the Word program. So what has to happen when Word 2010, let's say, opens up a docx file is it first knows that it has to unzip everything, and then it has to look through this file structure to find all the information that it needs in order to put your document on screen. But as we mentioned, by using XML, Microsoft maintains the interoperability of Office documents and files while opening up the range of files that Office can handle. So in this lesson, we learned that later versions, version 2007 on Windows and 2010 and later Mac versions of MS Office files are actually zipped XML file collections. It's not even just one file. It's actually a whole collection of XML files put in a rather complex folder structure and all zipped together. We've learned that this is the reason that it's incompatible with older versions. You'll notice that in newer versions you can save as a 97 to 2003 type document. Those are non-XML based, but you can still use the newer programs to generate the old code. And even though this makes things somewhat inconvenient during the period of time where you're transitioning over and you kind of need to reformat all your old documents, it increases the interoperability of the Office applications. Thank you for visiting educator.com.